Tina Frundt, and I'm the founder of Courtney's House. We work with boys and girls ages 12 to 21 that are sex trafficked in the U.S. and outside.
Define sex trafficking or sex slavery.
To define sex trafficking and sex slavery, I think everyone's really confused by that term. So sex trafficking means what we all grew up with knowing is pimping. People who force people, though, into forced prostitution. And then that other word, sex slave, I think is tricky because we think overseas, and let's just be honest, in the African American community, we really don't like to connect many things to slavery. But let me explain to you why this really is slavery. And trafficking, slavery, and pimping is all into one. 200 years ago, when there were slaves, there was an overseer. And the overseer was black. Not only was the overseer black, he watched the other slaves and he tricked the other slaves. And he actually worked for the slave master. The overseer actually had a gun. He sat on a horse, but he didn't try to free the other slaves at all. He kept him and his family members in slavery and snitched on them when they sang the Song of Freedoms. They were like, hey, let me tell you, slave master, they about to run right now. They rolling out. I'm telling you what those songs are, and that's what they doing. So with that being said, there was already a divide. Well, what people don't understand and know is that when the slaves ran and they couldn't find them all, the overseer got 40 lashes for every slave that ran. Well, that dynamic and control for pimping is a girl. So that girl is called the bottom, and the bottom has to watch the other girls. There was no application to be the slave, the overseer of the slaves. There was no application to be picked to be the bottom who watches over the other people. The slave records were actually kept in a stable, and pimps refer to a stable of girls that they have. So I think it's really interesting that people don't think this is slavery, but pimps call their girls their slaves, and they use all the same rules as slavery, the divide and conquer. So when there were slaves that were field slaves out in the field, and then there were slaves that were inside the house, that divide and conquer and that mentality, why on earth would an overseer, a slave who had a gun, not free himself and other people? Because he had a false sense of security that one day he would be free. So when people ask me if it's slavery, it is, because it's based, all the rules are based off of slavery.
I think it's safe to say that when the American people think of sex slavery and sex trafficking, they think of it only happening in places like Cambodia or Africa or something, but that's not really the case, is it?
And I think it's really how it's worded, you know, in the media and in the newspapers we see. Because what we see is 12-year-old Cambodia children trafficked from Cambodia to the U.S. Or we'll hear, you know, Russians trafficked. But when it's U.S. citizens, right here in Washington, D.C., where we're here and do street outreach 4 blocks away from the White House, what you hear is child prostitutes, 12-year-old sex ring with child prostitutes. So instead of saying that it's trafficking because it's U.S. citizens, it's prostitution, even when they're minors. And that happens right here in D.C.
Washington, D.C., the seat of the nation's power, supposedly. Okay. These men that abuse these children, what walks of life do they come from? Given that you're so close to the nation's seat of the nation's power, what walks of life do these men come from?
We do street outreach in Washington, D.C., right here, 4 blocks away from the White House. So the income that I'm talking about is going to be a different demographic and income, I think, that people think. They can be men with money, men without money, but usually if you're paying a fee from a pimp and have to pay $125 an hour to $200 per hour, then we're talking about an affluent community that can afford that and can afford to pay for a child.
It's a web of intrigue and spreads out like a spider web to Washington, D.C., right up to the steps of the nation's capital, the steps of the White House. Involves some of the most respected and powerful and richest businessmen in this United States of America. And the centerpiece of the entire web is the use of children for sex and drug dealing and drug couriers, the compromising of politicians, the compromising of businessmen, but worst of all, the corruption of key institutions of government that have the duty and responsibility to make sure these things never happen.
Tell me how it begins for said children. How do these children even get trapped into a life like this? Is there a set way that they get sucked into that, or are there different ways?
So in the U.S., there are 4 paradigms of sex trafficking. So that's pimp control, gang control, family control, and boy/transgender. So pimp control can be where a lot of different ways, where another girl, because all pimps are not male, they can also be female. So it can also be another girl bringing you to meet their boyfriend, and you don't know that this guy is a pimp. Or he can try to date that particular person, and again, not knowingly knowing that he's a pimp, and he tricks you into that piece. That's an average way that people usually enter their life. Family control is very important, because I think if they did the right statistics, we will see in the U.S. that it's actually more family control. So that means a person's family, their mother, their father, their uncle, inside their family is selling them for sex. Gang control. So maybe again a girl doesn't know or knowingly joins a gang. And it was not those years where they move up in the gang and they become captain, they become lieutenant, and they actually have a role in the gang, but they're usually sold for sex inside the gangs. So that can be that way. They go to a skip party. So a skip party is a party during the day that they'll go to, and usually you get gang banged in. So you get gang raped in, and they videotape it, and they force you to enter working for them, and that they're going to show everybody this video. And then you have boys. I think boys are overlooked in trafficking. We joke, we make fun, we say, oh, it's probably them doing it on their own, but we should probably remember that any child under the age of 18 is protected, because they can't sell themselves. So even if we think they're just selling themselves to have a place to live, a grown man bought sex from a child, and that's a crime. So boys are also tricked in as well. Boys can also have a pimp, or they can work with a family and have a transgender male called mama or grandma, godmama, that also runs that family and puts them on the street to sell. So there are different ways that actually people enter. The saddest part is that they all go through the same turmoil.
So what is an average day and an average night for a child like that?
Each paradigm of sex trafficking is very different. However, all the outcome is the same. So you spend your day working. It doesn't just mean on the street. You know, it can be on the street, it can be online, it can be in strip clubs, and yes, shocker, all strip clubs aren't legit. So strip clubs as well to work, and you can be forced to do in-call, out-call at hotels. So you work all day. So usually you work between, 18 to 22 hours a day. It's about making money for somebody else.
And you just repeatedly have sex.
It's about making a quota. So each person has a quota that they have to bring home. Monday through Thursday, it's usually about $2,000 Monday through Thursday, $4,000 on the weekend per child that you have. You can make that in a few hours, so usually your price goes up. And you work all day, forced to have sex all day long.
One after another.
If you can control about 3 or 4 key elements, you can totally own a state. You can make right wrong. You can make truth falsehood, falsehood truth. If you control the media, if you control the Justice Department, if you control the police, you own the system.